Hello, welcome to another Inspire Your Future talk. I'm here with Kian and I'll let him introduce himself.
Hello everyone, my name is Kian Bakhtiari and I am really excited to be here with you, Charlie, for
Thank
Inspire
you.
Your.
We're really excited to have you here and for you to share your insight and knowledge. Feel free to start with some of your background maybe.
Yeah, sure. I can start with my background. How far would you like me to go back, Charlie?
So maybe when your passion started and how that led to where you are today.
Sure. So as mentioned already, my name is Kian. So I was born in Iran and I came to the UK when I was 8. And when I came here, as you can imagine, it was a completely different world. So everything was new. I didn't speak English. By the time I learnt English, I was already getting into trouble at school. So I wasn't bad. I was just a bit mischievous and curious. And probably I would ask a lot of questions. So, but luckily for me, and this is why I think what you're doing with Inspire Your Future is so important. I had a teacher that really believed in me. My English teacher, her name was Miss Johnson, and that completely changed my trajectory in life. So, unlike a lot of my friends, I kind of managed to, yeah, I did my A levels, I graduated from university. So, I studied sociology. And after that, I became a researcher. So at the time, it was the time of the government cuts. So I was
Yeah.
very passionate about social change, as most students are. So I started as a researcher at House of Parliament, looking at the impact of government cuts on local communities. But to your point about passion, it sounded really exciting, but it was incredibly boring. So I left that job because there was a lot of recommendations and not enough action. And randomly, one of my friends invited me to a coding event. I went there, and little did I know they were recruiting for a new marketing agency called 46. And it was a big event. There was like, I don't know, 300 people there. There was like coding, live briefs. And once we were done, someone turned around and was like, would you like a job at a startup agency called 46? And I was like, sure, why not? And that's when I kind of stumbled into my passion, I guess.
Yeah, it's really interesting. These things sort of just come randomly sometimes. It's about sort of taking those risks. So that was sort of how you broke into this sort of creative industry.
Yeah, I think just like you mentioned, sometimes it's the serendipity of things. So um, just to take it back again, so when I finished my A levels, initially I wanted to do study international relations, but I didn't get the grades I wanted. And through clearing, I just randomly ended up choosing sociology. If I'm going to be very honest, it was because I didn't want to do another year at college. So I was like, I want to go out of London. So I just chose it. And again, the randomness of that, it was probably the best decision I never made because that course gave me the foundations through which I kind of see things today. And then again, to your point, the opening yourself up to opportunities by saying yes to things. So my friend the day before texted me, come to this coding event. And if I'm honest, I couldn't be bothered, but I went. And that very small and at the time insignificant decision to say yes has had a very disproportionate impact on my career and my future.
Yeah, you just don't know what's going to come out of these different things. So what was it like working at the startup?
Yeah, it was an amazing experience because we had the best of both worlds. So it was a startup called 46, and it was all about using the power of diverse perspectives to solve business problems. but at the same time, it was part of a bigger holding group. So it was part of Dentsu, which is one of the world's biggest marketing and communication companies. So it was really, I was lucky enough to have the best of both worlds, where we had the creative freedom to create things and start things from scratch, but we had also had the financial backing of a global corporation.
So what was it that you found during that journey that sort of helped you progress to where you are? What was it that you learned while working there?
Yeah, so I think the first one I've already touched on is kind of just being open to opportunities and saying yes to things, because you never know where that leads you to. And the more you say yes to things, the more likely you are to get somewhere. So that's the first thing I learned. The second one is the importance of curiosity. Um, I mentioned before, when I was at school, I used to get into trouble. Sometimes that would be just for like asking too many questions. But one thing someone said to me is, a great question is better than a great answer. Like, we already know our own answers to things, but it's only when you ask great questions that it leads to new results and new discoveries. So at that, and especially if you're going into a new industry like I was, I had no background. I hadn't studied marketing, and I had no background in the creative industries. So the best thing you can do is ask as many questions as possible, because that's how you learn new things. And sometimes, it's very common, Charlie, like for people to be afraid of asking questions in the fear that you might sound stupid or it's a simple answer. But most often than not, everyone else is thinking that, they're just not saying it. So second one I would say is just asking questions and being genuinely curious.
So that's sort of one of the top tips to come out of this is just be curious. And I think that's really important, especially now, is to just ask questions, look at things you might necessarily not think you're interested in straight away, but it's what can come out of that, or what can come out of those questions that might spawn from those different ideas. So what were your sort of responsibilities working at this startup? What was it that you were really involved with?
Yeah. When I first, at the very start, it was very similar to what I was doing before, which was mostly research. So I was taking care of research and insight. So helping brands. So it was an agency, and the way an agency works is you work with brands and you come up with insights, strategies, and ideas for them to communicate their brand to the world. So that could be advertising, it could be communication, it could be content. So the stuff you see on TV. So my job at the very beginning was research. So helping brands and the bigger agency groups understand what young people think and feel. So that's where I started. And then slowly I moved into strategy, which is kind of taking that research and those insights and actually looking at the implications. So if people think or feel a certain way, what could be done with that? And the best way I would describe my role at that time was a creative strategist. So you kind of provide, I would write the brief, or you provide the direction for the creative people to come up with all their amazing ideas.
Yeah, that's great. And you then left to start the people. What was it that really inspired you to start your own venture?
Yeah. I think the first thing, Charlie, was during my time there, I had an opportunity to, back to the curiosity point, just learn from the very best in the industry. And that's such a rare opportunity, but at the same time, I'll be interested to hear your thoughts. It's amazing how kind and generous senior people are to kind of helping like the future generation just kind of learn and kind of impart their knowledge.
Yeah, I think it's so important. Obviously, when I started Inspire Your Future, I wasn't sure how many people I would actually be able to connect with, and I was sort of overwhelmed with the amount of people who were willing to get involved, like yourself, and really help. and it's having that sort of connection with younger people to be able to share your knowledge. And I think especially now I've spoken to admissions tutors, and it's showing that you're more than just your grades. So being able to talk to professionals, learning a little bit more, work out how can you differentiate yourself, or how can you sort of show your passion is so important. And having people that are willing to help young people do that is really crucial, especially sort of moving forward through COVID. I think that's definitely a really important point there.
Absolutely. Because the automatic filter, right, is, you know what, I shouldn't reach out to that person because they're not going to reply. So it's amazing the number of times as humans we can self filter before it's even kind of gone out to the world. So I think, again, the way you're doing it, where kind of reach out to people that you really admire and respect, because the worst that can happen is they say no. The best that can happen is you can actually meet them, learn something, and grow. So that was for me the biggest thing. So during my time, I got to meet with some of the most amazing, talented people. And when you surround yourself with people, what good looks like and kind of where you want to be, that kind of speeds up your own journey. So that was the first thing. The second thing was, at the same time, I was seeing, as I was getting more involved in Dentsu as a whole, so working along projects with like Santander, the government account, and Adidas, that a lot of time, effort, and money was being spent by brands, millions and millions, to engage with audiences, and especially younger audiences. But at the same time, when I was chilling with my friends, most often they didn't care less. So there was this real disconnect between these two worlds. I was kind of partly in, because I was a bit of an outsider. I would look at it and I would see, like, in these rooms, these decisions would be made. But in the real world, people don't care that much about adverts. So I wanted to bridge that gap and involve real people in the creative process. And that's why I decided to start The People. And that's why we're called The People, because we're powered by a community of 150 young creators, and they really inform what they want to see in the world. And what that means is, when we work with brands and companies, what great gets created is what people want to see.
Yeah, I think that's so important. You can sort of create messaging or content that you think looks really good, but young people might just not respond to it, or anyone might not really respond as you expect. I know with COVID, I've worked with sort of councils and some public health in Northamptonshire, looking at how content can be tailored more towards young people. It's not just that sort of same branding with your sort of telltale colours in a set font that young people respond to. It's having sort of novel ideas that are really going to be eye-catching, and how you can use sort of these new platforms. I know TikTok's definitely grown massively over the past year, and it's how you can sort of harness these new technologies to really connect authentically with young people.
Absolutely. Because I can imagine in those meetings, Charlie, like everyone, and that's the other thing to know, everyone's bringing something to the table. So those kind of groups that you mentioned, or let's say brands, they've got this kind of deep knowledge or experience of their council or their brand. But it's like, can you complement that with the outside world, or the perspective you bring there into that room where you represent the audience? And that's where the magic happens, when you kind of combine those groups together.
Yeah, and it's definitely great that businesses and the government are looking at how you can bring in young people or other groups to really drive messaging forward and really make it better. And definitely people are able to relate more to it, and it then makes it more powerful overall. So I definitely think it's sort of something really important that sort of links quite well to what's happening now, and how sort of the future of businesses and marketing is going to change over the next few years.
100%. Because ultimately, it's about representation and participation. Like, the question that comes up is what's being created being represented in the room? And if it's not, something needs to be done about it.
Yeah, so would you say they're sort of linked to your values as sort of the people?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's the main one. How do you represent the voice of the people? So our role is to bring the voice of the people into the boardroom and kind of translate what people want to see, which is good for business, but really and truly it's good for community, because our mission is to unleash the creative potential of young people, because we know that not all young people get the same opportunity to fulfill their potential. And that's why, again, I think the work that Inspire Your Future is doing is great, because any way you can kind of provide stimulus or support or guidance to help people achieve their goals, it's a powerful thing.
Yeah, I think education has just been such a disparity in sort of the level of quality of education that different students, by no fault of their own, have received over the past year. And I think it's just helping to make sure that everyone has access to the same opportunities. If you're motivated and ambitious, making sure that you have the tools to be able to sort of pursue all of the same opportunities. So thinking about talking to people or just reaching out. I know over the past year there's been a lot of things where I've thought of an idea, thought, oh no, I can't do that. They won't respond or that won't work. And then only for a few weeks later to actually do it. And most of the time you do get some benefit out of it. So it's just going with these things, thinking what could be the worst thing that could come out of this. It's nothing bad is really going to happen. There's just a possibility that you might be able to get something or learn something. And I think that's so important. And I know when you started the people, you probably learned a lot about different elements of starting a very sort of creative business. And I'm not sure if you could share some of those, some of the lessons that you've learned over the past
Yeah,
sort of 2 years.
yeah, absolutely. I purposely, when you sent me the questions, Charlie, I purposely decided not to think about this section, because I hoped it would be like a stream of consciousness that kind of just comes out with the truth. I think the first thing I would say is, if you really care about it and you think it's your reason for being, just do it. Because
Yeah.
if you think about it too much and if you try to rationalize it, just like you were saying, you never end up doing it. And also, I promise you this is a positive, but the journey is so hard that if you don't kind of dive head first and then discover your way, that fear will get in the way. So the first thing is just do it. And then I'm going to say something completely the opposite to contrast with that is plan. So you see in these kind of magazines and movies and shows that the entrepreneur like just quits their kind of studies at university and just starts a business, and then in a year's time they're a billionaire. And now that's true, that can happen, but the reality is most business journeys aren't like that. So the more you can plan your path of how you want to get there, the more successful you are, but also the more opportunity you allow yourself to succeed. So just to reference that, when I first knew I wanted to do my own thing, I asked some of the people I respected most, how do I go about this? And I expected them, because they're creative and they're radical and they're mavericks, to be like, you know what, quit tomorrow and just do your thing. But one of the biggest things I got back was actually plan your route. Like, how are you going to get from where you are today to where you can make your income or your money from doing what you love? And actually, the road for me was going from a full-time job to 4 days a week, and then Fridays I got to work on my passion and what I love most. And then I kind of slowly transitioned that. Once the business plan was in the right place, I then transitioned into the business. So there's two things in there: kind of what's your plan of action, but also the other interesting part around that is, yeah, that's the other interesting part. So one is how do you plan around it, but the second one is how do you set goals of, this is where I want to be in a year's time, in 3 years time, in 5 years time. Because even if you don't achieve it, you get closer to it. The analogy I would use is, if you don't have goals, it's very hard to score, because you don't know what you're working
Yeah.
towards.
Yeah, there's definitely, I think having a goal is so important, even if you don't have to think what it is that I exactly want to achieve and be sort of set in stone that I must do this, but having at least something that you can aim for is so important, whether you've got to do something that you don't really want to do, but you're sort of doing it to get to this goal. So it's just making sure you sort of have an idea of what it is that you want to achieve. And I know you said about sort of just going for it, but also planning. And although they could seem sort of contradictory, they sort of do go hand in hand. Don't just sit with an endless to-do list of loads of ideas that you've got. Just sort of jump in, try and plan, put something together, and then you sort of go for it. You go from there. I know you can, it feels you could have just an endless list of ideas, but you just have to sort of start, put caution to the wind at some point and just have a go, and then see sort of what you can sort of pull together about that sort of different ideas that you've got.
100%. That's a really important one. Like being action orientated, because the truth is, I'm guilty of this. I did this at the very start, so this is why I'm sharing. You could almost plan to death. You can kind of do all the theory, but the reality of the world is a different thing. So the quicker you can kind of go to market, the quicker you can action things, the quicker you get feedback from the real world of what they like and what they don't. And sometimes the truth is that planning is a prevention of action because you're kind of worried to bring it out into the real world. So the best way to counteract that is just, again, not to think about it too much, because if you try go for perfection, it's really hard to maximize progress.
Yeah, and I feel there's an element of perspective. You might think that you're trying to get something, you make it perfect, and if other people don't see it that way, it could be so hard to then try and change or come back from that. So sort of just going out with some ideas, and then you can learn, adapt along the way. I know when I started, I didn't know much about having websites or the videos or how to edit them. It's just sort of starting, and as you go through, you get better, you adapt how you work things. And I think just trying it out, not just trying to plan everything in your head, or because I feel you can get stuck with just what you think works and what you think is going to be the best idea, when actually lots of other people have lots of really good ideas as well. If you sort of collaborate and talk with other people, then you're going to be able to benefit yourself and then everyone else who you're trying to help.
100%. Did you feel that in any way? So one thing I'm interested in, Charlie, like the idea you started with for Inspire Future and the version it is now, has there been kind of any kind of feedback or process that's kind of not changed the mission, but the way it's delivered?
I think I organised a TEDx event in June last year, and it was from that I wanted to sort of create a series of online videos. And there was lots before I tried things out. I had different ideas of who would be involved and how it would work, and I settled on sort of a style of having a speaker. I mean, there was lots of time I spent looking at different videos of how long they should be. I know some people like longer, shorter. So I tried to
Sure.
get around 30 minutes as a good time. But as I worked through different speakers, I found some people like to use a PowerPoint, some people don't like to use a PowerPoint, some people like videos, some people, there's loads of different ways of doing it. And one thing I found is actually you don't need one set way, and actually sort of adapting between different speakers. And every speaker I had, I wanted them to talk about something different about their passions and how they can sort of help students. So being able to tailor their talk and display it in a way that best portrays that message was the most important thing. And it was trying to adapt and think how I could take sort of the speaker's message and how we can portray that in a way that's going to be as beneficial as possible while keeping sort of their personality and passions in it as well, which is sort of my aim.
That's interesting. I think there's something really interesting in there around, like, for instance, you mentioned the TEDx you organized. There's something I've been told is from work comes work. So from the stuff you do and you accept, you learn things in life, and that helps you inform from those experiences and stimulus. You have a far better picture of the stuff you want to do than you ever would just planning with a paper and pen.
Yeah, and I think I'd be one of the biggest advocates for that, because I can say that I organised a TEDx event because I wanted to do something to help inspire students and motivate people really thinking about having that goal. And everything that I've been lucky enough to be involved with over the past sort of year, 2 years, have all stemmed from that. And when I started Inspire Your Future, everything I've been able to do and all the people I've been able to talk to have really developed what I wanted to do and sort of my outlook on different ideas. And I sort of found that I am quite passionate about education and how education can change and how students sort of best suited to it and what we can do about sort of admissions to university. And there's lots of things that I thought that I knew sort of when I started my A levels, and that has completely changed now. And I think part of that is applying to university. I applied in the UK and in the US, and I found the US university application so much more reflective. And a lot of the things that I did during that application, a lot of the things I sort of learned about myself trying to write all these essays, definitely changed my outlook. So one thing I would always recommend is, if you're looking at maybe applying to universities in a different country, I would definitely go for that. And even if you don't get in, and if I knew I wasn't going to get in, I wouldn't change what I've done. I would always apply, because I've been able to speak to so many different people and be involved and sort of been inspired to start different things. That has been so important. And definitely from doing things, I've learned so much more. So I think I really have to advocate for that. And I think especially for students now, that's so important. With the way that COVID is changing, I've spoken to people who have said that your exam results might not be enough. You really need to show that you're more than just your A-level results. There's lots of graduates now who are struggling to find jobs. So it's really showing your skill set, what you've done, showing that sort of entrepreneurial drive. So I think definitely the way the future is changing is definitely going to need a lot more of this sort of creative and sort of inspiration, new ambition to actually go on to do something to sort of work towards your goals. And what I've done has really taught me that. I'm glad for everyone who's been able to speak to me and yourself. So when you reach out again, like we said, you just don't know what's going to happen. You sort of come across people who you think align perfectly with your interests, and it's just sort of reaching out and then being able to learn from lots of different people who have more experience, who have gone through different journeys, who know sort of what works, what hasn't worked for them. And you can sort of bring all of this different advice together and then try and chart your own path. And then I think it's important to try and help then other people who can then bring your information with other people's, which I think will really build for strong sort of relationships in the future. I'm cautious of time, so I'm not sure if there's anything else that you had to share. I know this has flown by.
Yeah, it's absolutely flown by. I think nothing to share. I think just as a summary, just touching on the last point you made, Charlie, there's something really interesting. You talked about your passion for education. I think there's something interesting if you can kind of harness for anyone in their journey. And sometimes it's more difficult and it takes more time to find what you're truly passionate about. But if you can kind of harness that energy of what do you care most about as a human being, and in that way you can kind of drive yourself to achieve your goals based on what you care about and what you want to achieve. So that almost becomes the North Star that your ship is sailing towards.
Yeah, I feel education is so important. It's not just learning maths and English in a classroom. Some people sort of don't agree with the traditional education system, leave schools, set up businesses, different things, but you don't stop learning. I think that's one sort of common thing. A lot of people say you don't stop learning things or reading or teaching other people else, but don't seeing education just as sort of learning maths and English in a classroom is very sort of blinkered. You need to sort of think about all the things. I've definitely learned so much doing Inspire Your Future and being able to talk to so many different people. And it's just finding what your passion is and how you can sort of develop yourself and increase sort of your ambitions and what you can do to reach that goal. So I think, yeah, that's very important. So thank you for taking your time today to share some of your thoughts. I've really enjoyed talking to you. It's been really insightful.
Pleasure. Thank you for inviting me on Inspire Your Future.
Thank you very much. And if you've got any questions, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can submit them on a form on our website, and I can forward them to Kian, who should hopefully be able to get some answers back to you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.